Screen here and we will get started. So yeah, today's topic is about 5G and it's a big one. It's one that we've been getting probably the most questions on as of late, and we're going to focus in on kind of what it is, what it means for specifically a few areas in Alberta and Canada, and dive into kind of what we can do about it and different shielding technologies and different shielding ways of reducing the exposure. So I'm Mitch Marchand. I'm with a company called EMF Aware. My background is in electrical engineering, and I've been doing EMF assessments for, it'll be 9 years this August. So thanks everyone for joining, and let's dive in. So what is this 5G? 5G basically stands for the 5th generation of mobile phone technology. And this is in addition to the 2G, 3G, and 4G, or the existing mobile phone technologies that are out there currently. It's not going to replace any of these. It's just going to be another layer added on top. So the interesting thing about 5G is it's going to include a lot of existing frequencies and technologies that are used in the other generations of mobile technology, but then it's going to add in some new components, some new frequencies, some new technologies, some new modulations into that. So it's going to be a little bit of the old, a little bit of the new, but it's going to be added on top. 5G has nothing to do with Wi-Fi in particular. Sometimes when you see, for example, over here we have this Shaw #/5G. When you go search for Wi-Fi networks on your laptop, this is not 5G. This is just simply the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. It's the newer Wi-Fi band that's out there. So this Shaw 3039D0 is the router. The D0 above here is the 2.4 gigahertz band. The Shaw 3039DO-5G, that's the 5 gigahertz band. It's been around since 2009. It's not new. They just had that because the 2.4 gigahertz band got too crowded. There's too many devices, so they had to open up another band. So that's the 5 gigahertz band. The 5 gigahertz band is also getting crowded, so they're planning on soon on opening up a 6 gigahertz band. So sometime in the near future, wireless routers will have 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and the 6 gigahertz exposures. But that has nothing to do with the 5G. So let's talk about all these different Gs. You know, first generation was just analog cell phones. Those are the big Radio Shack, big brick cell phones that were out there. After that, 2G came along, which enabled texting from your cell phone. 3G allowed us to browse the internet. 4G allowed us to download videos over the cellular network at reasonably fast rates. And 5G is promising faster downloads in self-driving cars. So downloads is like an HD video, being able to download in mere seconds, which is gigabytes of data. So it's supposed to be super fast. So that's what the 5Gs are, that's what the Gs are about. When we take a look at the big picture, at the whole electromagnetic spectrum, this includes everything from the natural DC field of the planet. That's how compasses work. It includes things like electrical transmission lines, computers, and it also includes a bunch of wireless technology, and also includes another natural source called daylight, and includes X-rays, gamma rays, and everything else. Today, we're going to be just focusing on the wireless radiation part, and specifically 5G. So when we look at just the wireless part, there's these intermediate frequencies like AM, FM radio, the TV, ultra high frequency band. As you go increase in frequencies, we get into microwave radiation like what Wi-Fi, cell phones, baby monitors, cordless phones, smart meters, and radar. So then we have these millimeter waves, which really haven't been used yet, but they're going to be used for one of the bands called the high band of 5G. So 5G has 3 different areas or 3 different bands that it's going to operate at, and the technologies that operate in those bands are going to be much different. So there's a low band, a mid band, and a high band. of 5G. So 5G just isn't one thing, it's kind of a suite of technologies. So the 5G low band it's between 600 megahertz and 3 gigahertz. This is essentially the same cellular frequencies that are currently being used. So that it's going to look very similar to 4G. It's using the same frequencies. It's probably going to be a slightly modified modulation. So it means it might cram a little bit more information in there, but we're not going to see self-driving cars and downloading movies in seconds off this low band. So the low band is what's currently being deployed by Rogers in Canada. They're the first ones out the gate in Canada, and that's what they're deploying is this low band of 5G. So we're not going to have self-driving cars or downloading movies in seconds based on that, the first implementation of 5G. This is the low band is the easiest one to implement from the telecoms because it's very similar to the 4G technologies. That's the one that they're going to start with. Is it going to have something called beamforming, which is kind of a new technology and a new way of sending a wireless signal? No, but the exposure from these is going to be 24/7. So very similar to the existing cellular networks that are out there that constantly emit 24/7 with those. The mid band is more like a Wi-Fi like system and probably has a similar coverage as a Wi-Fi system. So they're meant for shorter distances, but greater speeds. Likely areas that they're going to be put on are lampposts, power poles, and possibly in some public areas and whatever municipal infrastructure they can get their hands on. It probably won't be beamforming, so it's going to be more like a Wi-Fi type of signal, most likely, where it's going to be transmitting 24/7. If it is going to be a beamforming technology, we don't really know yet, but if it is, beamforming technology is just on demand. So just when you have to download a movie or just when there's a big file that has to be downloaded, will the beamforming kind of beam towards your phone and take over until the file's done, and then it turns off. And then we have the high band. This is supposed to be the ones that are going to be on lampposts and power poles, public areas very likely. It's going to be super fast. It will be beamforming. That's the only way they can implement the technology, and it will be on demand. So a lot of these technologies are going to rely on a backbone of either the low band or the 4G or 3G network, and then use beamform to do kind of the heavy lifting or the fast downloads. So that's kind of the three different flavors of 5G in a nutshell. So a little bit more about beamforming. So the 4G picture on the left here shows kind of a tower that's transmitting 24/7. It kind of does a circle around it. And it has a radius, we'll pick up anything within a kilometer typically is the range of these. Sometimes it's more in the country versus the city, but it usually has a range about a kilometer in the city. And it's transmitting and kind of spraying out the radiation 360 degrees continuously. When we get into the beamforming technology, it's more direct, it's more directional, and it's directing it right at the device and pinpoints it. So in order to be able to do that, it has to know its exact location in order to send the beam to it. These beams are focusing sometimes multiple antennas towards you to get that higher throughput that they need. So it's going to be a higher frequency, and it's going to be focused right at the device. So if there's something that gets between you and that device, sometimes the antennas are going to try to redirect the signal, sometimes bouncing off of different buildings. And it is really quite a complex system that they have. And it's only going to be on demand. It's only when we need to download the movie, download a large file, or when there's a big load from the cell phone that has to occur. Then it's going to beamform and then turn off is our current understanding of how it works. So I want to talk a little bit about the previous health effects from 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and LTE, kind of the existing mobile phone systems. And basically all the negative health effects apply to 5G, especially to the lower band. There's been 3 landmark studies. These are well funded, well executed, and well done studies. You know, the Interphone study in 2010, the toxicology program in 2018, and the Ramazzini Institute study in 2019. All of these showed increase of brain tumor and heart tumor from cell phone use in rats and mice. Sometimes it was only in the Interphone study, it was only an exposure of 45 minutes a day, and they were seeing those type of effects. So a lot of people are using their phone or being exposed to their phone for quite longer durations than 45 minutes a day. And these were just to 2G and 3G signals, not to the more complex 4G signals that are out there. The other important things to mention is 2011, the World Health Organization classified radiofrequency radiation, such as the frequencies and radiation that comes off cell phones, as a possible human carcinogen. Two of the scientists who worked on that classification say now it should be reclassified as a known carcinogen from the World Health Organization, and that's Hardell and Miller. So by the way, these slides will be available. You can just click on the links here if people are writing down madly to go to all the references in these slides. The Bioinitiative report has 1,800 peer-reviewed articles citing biological effects from radiofrequency radiation. And then the Yakomenko and al. 2015, oxidative stress from low-intensity radiofrequency radiation. Basically, oxidative stress is a stress response of the body. It's a precursor for many things like cancer, a lot of neurological conditions, and so on and so forth. There's over 200 references of oxidative stress, and this is from plants, animals, and humans. So it's quite broad and far-reaching. And oxidative stress is one of the common health effects from all EMFs, not necessarily just wireless technology, but also the EMFs from dirty electricity, electric and magnetic fields from electrical systems, and light, and certain cases DC fields as well. Okay, so 5G also has some additional unknown health effects, right? There's going to be new frequencies in these millimeter waves, which are the high band 5G. There's going to be more antennas, and there's more antennas because the higher the frequencies that they use, the distance in which they travel is less. Sometimes here in Calgary on a cloudy evening, you'll be able to pick up an AM radio station from Seattle, but you'll never be able to pick up an FM station from Seattle because FM stations are at a higher frequency. They don't travel as far. So these new 5G frequencies are going to be in the mid and upper band, mid and high band, are going to be at higher frequencies, which means they don't go as far, which means antennas have to be placed closer together. So if you think of it, you know, Rogers right now is deploying 5G, right? Then we also will have Telus and Bell who will deploy 5G. So those antennas have to be all factored in as well. So there's going to be a lot more antennas, which are going to be increasing the exposure. And these are going to be added on top of the existing infrastructure, not taking away anything. And we really don't have any 5G health effects studies on the general public. The only studies that were out there are based on military applications. And we really don't have any 5G health effects studies on the public. So it's just a big unknown. What we do know is that pulsed radiation, such as that comes from cell phones, has a negative effect on our cells of our body. And the more pulse the signal, it seems that there is more biological effect. So when we get into the higher frequencies, it's sending the ones and zeros more frequently, more pulses, and then the modulation is going to be much different as well. So our body likes a slow undulating, pure, it's called a sine wave. Anything that perturbs that natural sine wave is more biologically active. So for example, your microwave oven operates at 2.45 gigahertz, and we're allowed 10 times the amount of exposure from your microwave oven than a wireless router, based on the European environmental medicine doctors and what their 2016 safety guidelines are. So the difference is there's no information sent over the frequencies of a microwave oven. It's just there for heating, versus a Wi-Fi router has information and pulses that ride on the frequencies, and that is more biologically harmful. So we're allowed 10 times less radiation from a Wi-Fi router, for example, versus a microwave oven. Yeah, so there's a lot that we don't know. We expect to see that this will have a significant impact on people's health because it will be more pulses, more modulated, and more antennas, so the exposure is going to go up. When it comes to safety guidelines, Health Canada is ultimately responsible for setting exposure guidelines to radio frequency radiation. That includes 5G, cell phones, cordless phones, smart meters, all those. Health Canada's Safety Code 6 is severely outdated. It's based on thermal heating of a 6'2", 220-pound mannequin, and this was based on the 90th percentile of the military I think it was in the 70s when they did this experiment. So they basically took a simulated 220-pound, 6'2" mannequin, exposed them to one frequency. In your cell phone, for example, you have Bluetooth, you have Wi-Fi in the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz band. So that's 3 total, plus multiple cell phone frequencies coming from it. So there's more exposure than just the single frequency in which the heating, these thermal heating experiments were done. So they took this 220-pound, 6'2" mannequin, exposed them to one frequency, and waited for the temperature to increase 1 degree Celsius over a period of 6 minutes. And that's what the safety guidelines are based on. 40% of the population of the world have safety guidelines that are 50 times lower or more stringent than Canada. Includes Russia, China, Italy, Switzerland, so on and so forth. So Health Canada also states some different opinions. One is about organic food. It says whether or not you eat organic or conventionally grown produce is a personal choice. To date, there's no evidence to show that there's a health risk from eating conventional grown produce because of pesticide residues, or that organic foods are safer to eat than conventional food. So, you know, there's different opinions on this. If you ask any environmental medicine doctors on the front lines of this, they're going to state a very specific opinion about this, where they do think there is a negative effect. But Health Canada just is taking a neutral stance on this. One of the other ones has to do with BPA. They say, you know, the current dietary exposure to BPA through food packaging uses is not expected to pose a health risk to the general population, including newborns and infants. You know, again, there's some different opinions on that. So ultimately, you're responsible for your own health when it comes to these type of things. And you may not be able to rely on the government to provide the necessary safeguards. So I just want to make a quick plug here for the children and some vulnerable populations. Children have softer bones, thinner skulls, smaller bodies, so they actually absorb 2 to 8 times actually more radiation than adults. It just penetrates deeper into their body as well. Like I said, the cell phones and wireless devices were tested on a skull of a 220-pound, 6'2" mannequin, only from one source. Children's brains are rapidly developing, and there's a large number of studies that found effect of children's growth and well-being. So at the bottom here, there's a link to the clear evidence of risk to children from smartphones, Wi-Fi, and frequency radiation. So I just wanted to make that's an excellent, from February 2019, an excellent resource just outlining everything concerning kids when it comes to these wireless devices. Special considerations from pregnancy. There's multiple studies like this. This is just one of many. From UCLA, studied 13,000 mothers and children and found that prenatal exposure to cell phones was associated with higher risk of behavioral problems and hyperactivity in children. So just something to consider. There's also some environmental impacts of 5G. One of the major things that a lot of people aren't thinking about is the environmental impact of actually using a cell phone. If you just think of it, it's not very efficient use of energy. They basically have cell towers that try to transmit a signal in 360 degrees around the cell tower, 24/7, whether anyone's using that technology or not. That's how it works. Your cell phone is constantly making a connection to the cell tower, whether you're on a call or whether you're browsing the web or not. It just needs to know where you are, if you've moved, and initially connects to the cell phone closest to you and has to check where the next closest cell phones are in case you start moving. So this here requires a lot of power in order to just kind of spray the radiation everywhere to have the coverage that they need everywhere. So wireless technology requires 10 times more power than wired technologies. And if you kind of think about it, in an ideal world, we would probably have, one cell phone antenna from one cell phone antenna that would serve up a wide area. But that's not what we have. We have Rogers, Bell, Telus. They all have their separate antennas using up power to serve the same area, right? So there's quite a bit of power tied up in these technologies. Sometimes I've heard the quote from one of these papers, and the IEEE, that's where this comes from, put out this number. I've heard on other places where if you just were watching a 1 hour video off your cell phone, that's the equivalent of powering up 2 fridges for a week. So it is quite energy intensive. So it from an environmental impact stance, it just doesn't make sense. There's also concerns about affecting insects and plants and animals. It's probably going to be a little more subtle, but when we increase another layer of wireless technology, it's probably going to become more pronounced. So 5G sites in Canada. So this is as of April 15th, 2020. This is the latest information we have from the Industry Canada and from Loxcell.com. Loxcell.com has their own separate database that they use to provide to telecom companies, and the government actually uses their database to look at their own data sometimes because their own data is a little messy. So as of April 15th, Vancouver has 27 5G sites, Toronto has 88, Ottawa 32, Montreal 41, Quebec City 5, and Alberta has 0. So these are registered with the Canadian government. And as far as 5G sites that telecom companies own, there are none that I'm aware of. There are rumors of Telus has started to install 5G antennas. They just aren't active yet. So, we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. But there may be ones installed. They're just not active in Alberta. There's just some misinformation about 5G in Calgary coming out from somebody who threw out a bunch of YouTube videos. I did some fact checking on a lot of these things that he was talking about. For example, at the Calgary location, Scotiabank, this is on, I think, 6th Avenue, downtown Calgary. He was claiming that there were 4 and 5G antennas in the Schroeder lamps in the square. And when we looked into the documentation, in order to have a microcell on these lamps, you actually need to have this huge power supply and the microcell equipment to go along with it. So as you can see, all the lamp posts at the Scotiabank here in downtown Calgary, they don't have this huge cabinet tied to them. So there's no physical possible way that those could be a 4G or a 5G antenna. So I don't put a lot of weight into what they're saying. They said they researched this. I found this in about 30 minutes. So I took this picture today actually from the square just to confirm if there was any cabinets there, and there was not. So yeah, so you have to kind of be careful what you believe when it comes to these things. An interesting thing is about how TELUS is rolling out metro cells, specifically in Edmonton. In November 2019 in Edmonton, there's about 124 metro cells. So these are the cells that are put on lamp posts typically, or power posts or power poles. And in November 2019, there's 124. And on February 2020, 4 months later, there's 444 in Edmonton. All these are currently 4G antennas. Not to say that they can't be converted over to 5G, but it's just an interesting, they kind of did a blitz of installing these. So you'll see these on lampposts. Again, they'll have this huge cabinet, kind of similar to the Schroeder lamppost that I saw there, that you saw in Calgary. Something similar. Sometimes they're mounted on buildings. Sometimes they're like the TELUS buildings have a few that are mounted right on them. I know here in Calgary, and I imagine it's the same in Edmonton. But yeah, and if we see the metro cell or the metro cells aren't really deployed in Calgary, there's 19, then it went to 24. So they're just kind of focusing in on the Edmonton area. So let's just talk about solutions for a bit. Sometimes it's kind of depressing to hear all this information, but there are ways that we can, you know, limit the effectiveness of 5G or just do what we can in our what's within our control to help curb the deployment of 5G. So something that you can do right now is disable the LTE or 4G on your cell phone. You reduce your exposure up to 80%, and you just are utilizing an older technology versus a newer technology. So this is just trying to slow the the supply demand curve of 5G, right? The cell companies are making a huge assumption that people want faster internet service over the cellular network. And by going from a LTE to a 3G system is you do have a slower connection, but if you're not downloading movies when you're out and about on the cellular network, you probably won't notice any difference. So there's just a way of how I just show these are the most common ways for iPhones and Android phones. It is slightly different for certain service providers, but this gives you the general, this probably applies to about 80% of the phones out there. Another interesting thing that I just found out was switching to these budget carriers. It's called Lucky Mobile or Public Mobile. They only use 3G networks. They don't use the 4G or LTE networks. And because of that, they offer you a lower cell phone plan. It's much lower. But Lucky Mobile is owned by Bell. They have the same coverage as Bell throughout the country. And Public Mobile is owned by TELUS, so you get the same coverage, but it only uses the 3G networks. So just by using those two mobile companies, you'll reduce your exposure by about 80% off your cell phone. So that's a neat little hack that we just kind of figured out last week. There's these two petitions that are coming through. One is to the Canadian government requiring 305 meters between cell towers and schools. I highly recommend that people sign a petition. One of the MPs that brought this forward is kind of being slammed in the media. He's been backed by Meg Havis and a few other scientists, and he's actually just standing up for his constituents, which is really great to see. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. So we really highly support. We really want to support that petition. The other one is the Canadian 5G appeal. It's an urgent appeal to the Government of Canada to suspend 5G rollout and to choose safe, reliable fiber connections. This is led by the former Microsoft Canada President, Frank Clegg, and it's a nationwide appeal. And if you go to that website, they have excellent resources and excellent references about 5G. On it. So highly recommend people check that one out as well. When we actually want to deal with this 5G, we have a few things going against us. To deal with the root cause of this, the root cause is the supply and demand for these wireless networks, right? We have a supply and a demand and an addiction problem to them. If there wasn't a demand for these products, they wouldn't be deploying the 5G. So, if we allow cell phones to be hardwired to the internet, that would be one solution to do that. Right now, we're limited. We can't receive phone calls or text messages from Android phones if we hardwire our cell phones. We can still receive apps like WhatsApp or WhatsApp. We can still get Facebook, Instagram, or emails. you know, we can do all those type of things, but if we hardwire our cell phone to an Ethernet and internet connection, we still can't get our calls and our text messages from Android phones. So I'm hoping within a year from now, we'll have this ability. We can do it over Wi-Fi calling right now. We just can't do it over hardwired connection. So everything's in place to do this. It's just a software hardware connection that has to be made. The other thing is like we talked about already, switch your cell phones to 3G networks from 4G, just to give support to some of the older technologies and giving less support to the newer technologies. The policy changes at municipal levels is kind of an important thing. I think a lot of towns and cities don't realize what's going to happen and we're kind of in this weird spot where the federal government has federal jurisdiction over where cell phone towers are residing. But at a municipal level, they have some leverage on putting in bylaws or saying that, you know, for example, in Calgary, we no longer can allow the lattice cell towers. They have to be the monopole, the smooth pole. So at a municipal level, you can make, for lack of a better term, bylaws or certain restrictions that have to be met. So in certain places, they're restricting where cell phones or cell phone towers can be placed, or these micro cells or metro cells on lampposts and things. They say it can't be anywhere near a school where kids are playing, daycares, nurseries, those type of things. So I see protecting that population. I also see protecting the elderly as well. They're also as vulnerable to these just as much as young kids are. Their immune systems aren't as strong. So that's another place where I see that would be needed for extra protection. You know, some other policy changes is preferring fiber over wireless when possible. There's a case study from Chattanooga, Tennessee, where the municipality employed or deployed a fiber optics network throughout the whole community. And what happened was they had the fastest internet in the country at the lowest cost. And they actually ended up paying for this over a 3 or 5 year period. And they actually had a lot of economic side effects, as a lot of tech companies are setting up in Chattanooga because they have the fastest internet in the country. So I think they have like 1 gigabit rates, which is about twice as fast as what Shaw or Telus have now. And their internet costs are about $40. So it's been a really great for the community, and it's been really great for business, and it doesn't emit any wireless technology. So that's not the cellular network, it's more like the internet infrastructure, but it's just a simple way that the municipality took that over. And then there's policies at the federal level. So at the federal level, they're the ones that have the jurisdiction over these cell towers and over the safety guidelines. And unfortunately, it's kind of a it's a conflict of interest, to be honest. They sell spectrum to the telecom companies and make billions of dollars by selling the spectrum that the telecom companies use. And then they also have to regulate what's considered safe. So it's a huge source of income for the government, but they kind of disregarded the safety that goes along with that. And part of the reason why they've actually disregarded the safety, I believe, is they don't really have a good solution for this, right? If they say we have to reduce these exposures to like whatever the European environmental medicine doctors from 2016 came out with their own guidelines, if they said that they have to meet those guidelines, they would have, most of the infrastructure would be useless. They wouldn't be able to transmit very far, and a lot of the infrastructure would just not work. So they really don't have a good solution on how to make this happen. If they did, they would probably be more interested in accepting the fact. If they accept the fact that these levels are too high and they're causing cancer rates and tumors and various health conditions, once they accept that, they actually have to take action on it as a government. And what they don't have is a good solution for this problem. So I believe that's one of the biggest hurdles that's holding up the whole regulation and new safety guidelines. When it comes to 5G meters, I get this question quite a bit. Something that measures all 3 bands of 5G is costing probably well over $10,000. And it's particularly the one that's hardest is that high band. That's the one that's very difficult and expensive currently to measure. The meters that measure the low band and the mid bands are readily available. One's called the Safe and Sound Classic. It's like $191. The other one's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2. These are kind of the newest meters that have come out in the last few years. And these ones have the kind of the widest range to get most of, actually to get all of the mid and low band 5G. So these are available from a company called Safe Living Technologies. Just a caveat, basically all EMF meters are becoming have low supply right now. The chips come from Canada, US, China, and Germany to make these, and the availability of these chips is just becoming more sparse because some of the plants have shut down. So supplying, there's a very low supply of these. They may become harder and harder to find. This is right across the board. This isn't just specific to the Safe and Sound Classic or Pro 2. It's a common supply chain issue that's going on right now because of COVID. Shielding materials, fabrics like Swiss Shield Naturel work with the 5G low and mid bands. It does basically about a 99.99% on the low band. It's probably going to be like something like 95% in the mid band. And then in the high band, that's where things will drop off. We don't really know what effectiveness they are. They might be 50, 60% effective. And it just happens to be that if there's any holes, which there's holes in the fabric is basically a fine metal mesh that's woven, wrapped in cotton. So wherever there's holes in the fabric, it's going to allow 5G signals to come in, especially the high band. Versus when we get down to the paints and the RF foil, these do a really good job of the high band, low band, and medium band, basically because they're kind of solid. There's no holes in them. They're kind of a solid piece. So those type of things are used for shielding radio frequencies such as and 5G. You always have to be careful when you employ these whether it be the fabric or the foil or the paint. What happens if you want to block the 5G out of your bedroom, for example, and you paint the exterior wall of your bedroom, that'll block everything from the outside. But if you have a Wi-Fi router inside your house, it's going to bounce off that wall and amplify that signal. So it's always a double-edged sword. It basically works on a reflection principle. As the signal comes in, it reflects off. But if there's a signal coming from inside your home, it's going to reflect back into your home. So whenever we employ shielding materials, we always like to measure before and afterwards to make sure that it's doing what you're doing and there isn't some other source that you haven't thought about that's making things actually worse. So just get some help whenever you employ shielding materials, especially measure before and afterwards to make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. So the paint will go on the walls. The foil is mostly used for renovations and putting in behind the drywall. It's just very economical, but it's mostly used for renovations. Other shielding materials that'll work quite well is aluminum siding will work quite well for blocking out 5G, and metal roofs will also reflect the wireless technology away. So those are some things. What else do I have here? And how are we doing for time? I wanted to leave lots and lots of time here, so it's about 42 minutes. So that's good. For questions, there's a lot more that I could have talked about, but I just wanted to kind of cut it short there and just open it up to any questions that people have. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here, and if there's anybody who has any questions, please let me know. I'm just going to swing through the chat group here and see if anything pops up. If anyone has any questions, just let me know.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, it's Liz from Edmonton.
Hi, Liz.
I'm just inquiring about the meters to measure the 5G. Are
Yes.
they worthwhile investing in? I mean, I'm not really sure about how to use them, or, you know, even just to measure the amount of radiation in my home. I've been back and forth with TELUS. They've installed a 5G box in my basement. They just say, oh, we don't have the technology to measure. And I'm like, well, you're a telecom company. I'm sure you do. But yeah, so just some feedback on any meter devices.
Yeah, so the safe and sound meters are pretty economical, and they measure a lot of things. They measure Bluetooth, they measure Wi-Fi, they measure smart meters, they measure a whole series of things, and they measure things like airport radar, and the low band and mid band of 5G, which are going to be the ones that are probably going to be deployed first in Canada. So and yeah, so you know, for me, I love seeing people with meters because they go and explore their own environment and figure out what's transmitting and what's not. And it's really empowering to people. It kind of brings what they can't see, smell, or feel. It kind of, draws it, makes the invisible visible, and then they can actually take action on it, right? If they
Mhm.
find that, it's this Bluetooth speaker that I never use that's always transmitting in the background, or my treadmill that I haven't used in so long that has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built into it that's transmitting all the time right underneath my bedroom, simply unplugging it and seeing the values on the meter go down is quite rewarding. And all those things you wonder about, right? Um,
Yeah.
what about the Nest thermostats? What about the Nest um, smoke detectors and all those things? So I find it really empowering to people, even if you don't know what you're doing, just to play around and just to move around and just to hear the different sounds that these things are making. The Safe and Sound Pro and the Safe and Sound Classic have a sound analysis. And on the Safe Living Technologies website, they have these sounds that you can listen to help determine what the source is as well. So you
Cool.
turn these things on. The Safe and Sound Classic just has like high, medium, low kind of exposures geared towards the building biology guidelines, which are pretty conservative. And if you use the sound analysis, it might give you a clue of, is that Wi-Fi? Is that Bluetooth? Is it my microwave oven? Is it, what type of things are going on there? So yeah,
Yeah.
I highly like, and RF meters, you're going to need them in the future. Our environment just has more and more of it coming in. So I see it as a good investment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Mitch,
Yeah.
just curious about one of the things we're most worried about is just the 5G antennas and, the potential for those just popping up unbeknownst in our neighborhood, or, we live beside a church, and I know we've seen a lot of in a school, and we've noticed a lot of online pictures and whatnot showing that these tend to be prime locations. Is there any way of finding out in advance of these just, cropping up?
Yeah. So there's one person in every city who deals kind of as the liaison to the telecoms. Um, and they know where potentially, and there's no guarantee, but they know where the telecoms are looking to site cell towers. So they may not have been officially approved, but they know where they're planning on putting them up. So sometimes when people are doing like a new home buyer assessment with me, we go in and we do the assessment, we check out the existing cell towers, and sometimes we give a call to the city and talk to, I forget what the term is or the position, but in larger cities, it's one kind of dedicated person, or it's like a shared role with another person, but and they are the liaison, and they should be able to tell you where the proposed sites are. Um, but that's just a best guess. There's no guarantee that those will move ahead until it's actually approved, and the cell company can change their mind at any given time throughout the whole process, right? So there's no guarantee about it, but that's kind of the best guess and the best information that we have. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess the other, besides the petitions, though, is there any way to like take a stand or have any input or say into it? Besides burning them down.
Yeah.
Totally kidding, obviously.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Burning them down actually has some serious environmental impacts.
I'm sure it does.
just from the burning of the chemicals, and anyway, it's counterproductive ultimately. But for that and other reasons. But yeah, as far as taking a stance, the 5G appeal in Canada is a huge step forward. They're dealing with at a federal level, which is ultimately where we have to deal with this. The petition, the other petition that I have in the notes here, the slides, was to limiting cell towers within 305 meters from schools and playgrounds, which would be a great first step as well. There's a Facebook group called Alberta. If somebody knows what it is, put it in the chat. It's Alberta. Let's just see if I can look it up here.
Albertans for Safe Technology.
Yes. And I really like what they're doing. They're actually controlling the content that gets put on their website to try to keep it really high quality on the Facebook group. A lot of these other EMF sites just degrade quite rapidly as the user base grows. And they're trying to keep everything kind of at a high quality. There's also ones in Calgary. I think there's one called Calgary EMF awareness group, and Southern Alberta one. And I believe there's one in Edmonton as well. So those groups are just kind of, they kind of put on events from time to time. So it's just nice to know where those are at, and keep your ear to the ground. I'm not a policy and politics guy. I'm more of a technical guy. But talking to those people and just getting more information about what they're doing and what can be done would be a great first step as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Mitch, it's Peter and Linda here.
Yes.
Mitch, you've covered some really good information. I had a couple of questions here regarding the satellites, that there's been rumors that they will be incorporating it with the 5G technology.
Yeah.
If you have any ideas about that.
Yeah, so as far as the 5G over the satellites, it's kind of an interesting problem. One, they're in lower orbit, so they're actually quite far away. And when we actually look at the exposures, so we did the calculations when Google did this Google balloon, and we wanted to figure out, okay, what's the exposure that we're getting from the low satellites that would be transmitting a wireless signal of some sort, basically trying to provide broadband internet wirelessly. And when we did those calculations, we got 1 microwatt per meter squared as the exposure on the ground. So what that is basically, if you were in a room with a Wi-Fi router, you'd be at 10,000 microwatts per meter squared. So an ideal spot would be less than 10 for sleep watts and 100 microwatts per meter squared during the day. And we was in a single detached home in the city. When we turn off all the wireless technology inside the home, typically we rest around 100 microwatts per meter squared. Okay. So the exposure isn't going to be all that great from them, but as we know, when we look at how our body reacts to these wireless technologies, it reacts in a non-linear fashion, right? So it doesn't mean if we double the exposure, it's twice as bad for our body, right? Sometimes when we have the exposure, our body reacts more negatively than if we had a full dose of, 3 or 4 or 5 times that. So our body reacts non-linearly. Some people can take, a sleeping pill and it makes them tired, and other people take a sleeping pill and it actually excites them, right? Oh. So our body is not always predictable, but what we find is even sometimes low levels are causing issues, especially for people who are electrically hypersensitive. So the satellites, I was sitting in my hot tub in Wainwright on the long weekend, looking up at the stars, and I counted 45 satellites go by, and those are the Starlink ones. So they're not directly over us, they were to the south. And you can see these sometimes at night. They're there, they exist. The Starlink ones are the Elon Musk satellites. Yes. So they do exist. They are going to they are going to create an exposure. How big of an exposure is going to be downplayed. It's going to be very minimal, but that may have it may have an impact on certain people. So when those go live, it'll be interesting to see what happens. You know, when FM radio went live, we saw, you know, some people who are electrically hypersensitive all over the world have some negative side effects. When certain things like radar and things were implemented, you know, each one of these steps, there's been significant effects on people's health. It doesn't affect all the population. Well, it actually probably does affect all the population, but to different degrees, depending on your constitution. So, yeah, the 5G satellites is an interesting problem. Again, they have to be licensed through Industry Canada, so it's a federally regulated body. So they need the go-ahead from the federal government to make that happen.
Yeah, and well, thank you for that. That's a great explanation. I guess my other question in relation to what you just explained was, does it need the 5G infrastructure on the ground to work in tandem?
Yeah, they're kind of building the plane and flying it too when it comes to the 5G satellite system. With such low exposures on the ground from them, I suspect they would need a dish to concentrate those signals, similar to how they do the satellite TV, you know, system where you have a little dish to concentrate the signals. That's basically what it does. So I imagine it's going to be something like that. They'll need something to catch and concentrate the signals from the satellite in order to make it work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Mitch. I have a question for you.
Yes.
First of all, will you be sharing the recording with us?
That is my plan. I have it recording, so I think I can do that. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Because I'd like to.
And the slides. The slides will be with all the links in it as well.
Okay, thank you. Because I'd like to share this. My second question is, I have an EMF fields acoustometer, and is that a good meter?
Yeah. So is it the Acousticom 2 or the AM10?
AM10.
Yeah. So so those are pretty good meters. They have quite a broad range. They go up to about 8 gigahertz. So they're going to tackle most of the low band and mid band. It does tend to slightly unreport the higher frequencies. And it's just a function of when the meter was built. It was built a few years ago before the 5G was even on the radar. And they put in, you know, they wanted, and even before the second band of Wi-Fi was what was released. So it does a good job. It'll tell you if your situation is getting better or worse, which is what most people need, and it'll tell you if it exists there. So yes, I'd hold on to that meter and use it.
Okay, and then my next question is, I live in a condo downtown, but on the edge of downtown, right in East Village on the Bow River. And my readings are like, they're all in the red zone. And my auntie lives in the Northwest, and her kind of between State and the university, and her measurements are in the red zone as well. How dangerous is the red zone on this meter? Is 0.7 to 1. Nothing was in the yellow or green ranges. So how dangerous is that?
Yeah, so you're reading on the left-hand side, which is the volts per meter. So 1 volt per meter equals about 2,000 microwatts per meter squared. From a building biology perspective, a sleeping area, an ideal sleeping area is 10 or less. That also corresponds to what the European environmental medicine doctors, so these are board certified environmental medicine doctors from Europe in 2016, came out with their own safety guidelines, and they like to see sleeping areas 10 or less and daytime exposures of 100 or less. So, you know, when you're dealing with condos, you're never going to get to that 100 or less or 10 or less level unless you get a bed canopy for your bedroom. And when you're looking at a single detached home, you know, there's different densities within the city. The older neighborhoods have larger lots and have more space between you and your neighbors. So the exposures tend to be less. And whether it be a cell phone tower, a Wi-Fi router, or your cell phone, every time you double the distance from it, you reduce your exposure 4-fold. So the difference between holding a cell phone up to your head and 3 feet away from you is a 50-fold reduction. So distance from your sources is very important. And that's why when you're in a condo, you know, there are more Wi-Fi routers closer to you. So that's why your exposure increases.
Okay, so you're using numbers like I was telling you 0.7 to 1 plus volts per meter, and then you're saying 10 to 100. So what is the like?
So sorry, yeah. So yeah, what my meters work in microwatts per meter squared. So 1 volt per meter is equal to
Okay,
2.
I have that on the other side. Okay.
Yeah, but the way that that meter works is the peak is on the left and the average is on the right. And what we want to be looking at are the peak values.
Okay.
So it's just units, but that 1 volt per meter equals 2,000 microwatts per meter squared. So that number is what we want to be under 100 or 10.
So I'm living in a very dangerous EMF zone.
You're living in a zone that has a higher exposure than what we want to see from an environmental medicine perspective. So we're not concerned about you living there for a day, month, or a year. If you were living in that for 5, 10, or 15 years, there'd be higher incidences of certain rates of cancer and certain other conditions. There might be some fertility issues. There might be, if you're electrically hypersensitive, there'd be neurological and hormone potential issues as well. So that's what we're concerned about with those readings.
Okay, and then I just have one more question. I missed it because I wasn't paying quite enough close enough attention. You said something about it was better to be with Bell or another network as opposed to, I think you said Rogers and Telus.
Yeah, so the Lucky Mobile and the Public Mobile are cheaper mobile plans for your cell phone, and they're called a virtual network. They basically were created. The Liberal government wanted more accessible, more affordable cell phone plans, so a lot of these companies split out these low budget cost companies like Public Mobile and Lucky Mobile. So Public Mobile is the Telus version, Lucky Mobile is the Bell version, and they only connect to 3G networks. They don't connect to 4G networks. So your speed is slower, and when you get the slower speed, you get a big discount on your cell plan each month. So it's a cheaper cell plan that doesn't have 4G or LTE, and it probably won't ever have 5G on it. So your phone only connects to those 3G antennas, which reduces your exposure from LTE to 3G or even to 4G. You reduce your exposure by sometimes 80% just by doing that switch.
Could I bother you to do a blurb on that in an email and blast it out to us in your email? Could you do that in your newsletter or something?
Yeah, I can include that. It's something that we just kind of figured out in the last couple of weeks here. It's in the presentation notes, the links to those two
Brilliant.
to those two companies.
Okay.
So they're just low budget cell phone companies that only use the 3G network. So.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your time.
Yep.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
So I live in a condo building, and we've just, as a condo board, allowed Telus to put an antenna on our roof. They haven't built it yet, but it was sort of in my saying yes was, well, it's $20,000 to our building versus the building next door, so we should take it. But what is your view on grounding pads in a condo building?
Yeah. Interesting question. So the whole so first of all, earthing is the whole thing of, everyone agrees that if you walk outside in a forest or with your feet in the ocean on a beach, what happens is the negative electrons from the earth go into your body and they quench the positively charged entities in your body, which is free radicals or inflammation. So everyone agrees that, get out there and earth in nature, and there are some positive effects. So when you're actually walking on the earth, you're in the circuit, okay? When you're earthing with an earthing pad, you kind of are taken out of the circuit and you put you're not in the circuit anymore, you're outside the circuit and you're connecting into it. So it's just a different way you're just in a different spot in the electrical circuit. basically electricity is going to flow through you when you put your earthing sheet in. If there's any AC electricity that gets coupled onto you, it will create a flow of AC electricity through you. So what's known is through NOSHA in the US, they did a study on contact current, and they said 18 millionths of an amp or higher of AC electricity current that flows through you is carcinogenic.
Wow.
So that is a very low level. So when we earth, the best practices for earthing is to earth to outside, to the ground, typically by a tree, because around the tree it typically stays moist. And the other thing that we recommend you do is you de-energize the power to your room. So turn off the breakers and the circuits to your room. And then what you have is you don't have a buildup of voltage on your body that gets transferred as current through the grounding sheet and dissipates. So when you're grounding in a condo, you don't have access to the outside world, and most people use that third prong outlet. That third prong outlet always has 30 to 60 millivolts of AC electricity on it. It's not zero, it's always at an elevated level from zero, and that can or cannot, that may cause an issue for this contact current flowing through you, through the circuit, the grounding mat. So when we measure this in people's homes, is we actually measure the contact current. Ideal levels are, definitely under 18 microamps, which is a carcinogen. For electrically hypersensitive people, I tend to avoid it if it's over 2 microamps. It's often higher than that in condos. So, and it just has to do with not necessarily what's going on in your unit, but what's going on in the whole building. So, your body's probably better than any meter that I have. So check in on your body when you plug it in, try it out for a week or two. If you're somebody who has heavy metals in your body, you have to be really careful, because if you were to go into a bed canopy, use an earthing mat, turn off your Wi-Fi, turn off the breakers in your room, your detox enzymes might go bananas, and you might start moving heavy metals very rapidly, and you may feel very crummy. So when you use earthing mats, just have to kind of keep that in mind. And if you think you might be toxic, get some help from somebody who knows how to do the detox program from a medical profession.
Great. So with the building having a antenna now on top of it, or soon to be, is there anything in particular, like, do you think that the canopy is the best solution?
In general, canopies are a really good solution for condos, because basically what it does, it knocks out whatever you have, tens of thousands of microwatts per meter squared, 50,000, 100,000 microwatts per meter squared, down to almost nothing. So it brings you down from whatever you're at to ideal levels. So if you get a bed canopy, make sure you get a floor sheet that goes underneath the bed as well, and de-energize the room. If you're in a high-rise condo, you're going to have metal clad wiring in there, and you won't have to de-energize, you won't have to de-energize the room, but you will have to unplug everything that's plugged into your room, like lamps and things like that, because those will create an electric field that'll couple onto the fine metal mesh, which the bed canopy is, and increase your body voltage. So you just have to be a little bit careful with that. But yeah, bed canopies are great for condos, as long as you have the room de-energized, or you have metal clad wiring and you unplug everything.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi, Mitch, it's Linda here.
Yes.
Hi. Regarding the phone, I have an Android phone, and I do see that LTE little symbol at the top. I do put it in airplane mode whenever I'm not using it. Is that okay? And therefore I wouldn't have to do this LTE switchover?
Yeah, so the LTE to 3G is primarily for when you're using the phone. It reduces your exposure up to 80%. So if you use your cell phone at all, then yes, I would switch you over to the 3G. Obviously, if you're in airplane mode disables all the wireless transmitters in the phone. So that's great, especially when you're sleeping and those type of things. But if you are using your phone, if you ever take it off of airplane mode, by having the LTE disabled, it will reduce your exposure significantly while you use it.
Oh, okay.
So I would recommend that, yes.
Oh, that's great. And also regarding the satellites that Peter was talking about, if we were to build a place, I know you recommended metal roofs, would that combat the issue from space, the 5G from the satellites?
Yeah,
If we had a
absolutely.
metal roof?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that would mitigate that piece of the puzzle for sure.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you. I think Peter had one quick question.
And that was in regards, just during your earlier presentation, you were talking about the 5G being on demand once it's up and running. So my question is, if we don't have anything on demand in our home that requires 5G, are we going to be able to get our neighbor's signal while we're here in this urban environment?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? So when the 5G is a beam, right? And the 5G, the beamforming technologies are at the higher frequencies. The higher frequencies have a difficulty time going through trees, right? So if you have evergreen trees, that's going to block it. You know, it really likes clear line of sight is what we're finding. And there's some information out there that's contradicting that. There's some Verizon demonstrations that are contradicting that, where they can actually get it into homes, the beamforming into the homes, where we thought that may not be possible. So we just have to wait and see what that looks like. But yeah, the beamforming, the signal will be your exposure will be quite high if you're caught in the beam, for example, in between the device and the beam. But this device is constantly redirecting the signals to avoid that. It wants the clearest signal to your device. So it's constantly adjusting. So they've done tests inside cities and stuff like that with these devices, and the device will actually change. So if a big food truck pulls up between you and the beaming antenna, it's going to try to bounce it off of a different building or kind of play a bank shot to your phone to do that. So it sounds quite like space age and sci-fi-ish. But that's what they're working on. And you know, we all thought 3G was impossible, they made that work. We thought 4G was impossible, they made that work. This sounds pretty sci-fi-ish, but they're probably going to end up making it work. So
okay, so being in a rural environment probably would be the way to go at this point in time. Would that be one of the last places they roll out?
Yeah, these devices, the one thing that's going for us is that these 5G devices are very expensive to actually deploy. You know, they're only going to be deployed in areas where they have a large customer base. And the largest customer bases are the ones that are being deployed currently, right? Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and Quebec, right? Those are where 5G is right now being deployed. The heaviest densely populated areas are going to get it first. So downtowns are going to get it before the rural, you know, suburbs, and you know, out in the urban areas, they may not get it at all, right? Because it just doesn't make sense economically.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Liz again. I have one more question.
Yeah.
Hi, just wondering about the possibility of legal action, like a class action lawsuit against the government to be negligent in letting this technology go ahead. I mean, I know what they're going ahead with it in the UK. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm not a legal person or a lawyer, so I'm probably any answer I give you, it's it's going to be quite poor. But you know, there's people like Dr. Magna Havas. You know, she's an expert witness for these type of things. Frank Clegg is throwing, you know, the ex-president of Microsoft Canada is really trying hard to make some policy changes and to do that. You know, the Take Back Your Power movement is an interesting one, and it'll be interesting to see what happens out of that. They've had some success with smart meters, and they want to do something similar with 5G as well. So they have a different legal instrument that most people aren't aware of that they're using. So you can always check out what they're doing at the In Power Movement website.
Okay.
And they are providing some kind of legal support. So I know there's been a few groups in BC that have gone through with the process of the Empower movement. So we more on a smart meter basis, I believe. Yeah, that's probably some good starting points.
Okay, sorry, and one last question. Do you know anywhere that we could access lawn signs? I just find most of the people in my vicinity, they have absolutely no idea about 5G. I've actually ordered bumper stickers from this one company, and just thought maybe we could get some lawn signs. I don't know if they're out there.
Yeah, you could contact like the Albertans for Safe Technology on the Facebook page, see what they have.
Okay.
And it's all about being aware of which politicians are aware of this, right? The Green Party might be interested in this from an environmental impact position. It's all about finding the people who will listen and trying to support them as much as possible as well.
Yeah,
So.
I've written to my MP, Matt Jenru, and he basically wrote me back saying they are against 5G, and my hunch is they're against it more for the security issues with 5G than actually damaging to humans. But we're pushing, we're writing as many letters as we can.
Right. Yeah. That's any gains we can make on the political side of things. Just from an awareness standpoint, would be awesome. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A question for you.
Sure.
This is Lori. Have you heard of any quiet zones in Canada?
Yeah, so there are a few quiet zones. So it's kind of difficult for electrically hypersensitive people when they want to find a place to recover, and there really isn't any better solution than basically EMF sanitation, basically taking all the EMFs out. That is the best tool for helping people heal. Unfortunately, it's a little isolating, a little wearing on the soul to do that. So I know there are some people who are electrically hypersensitive in Alberta who have some, like a cabin or something like that, where they retreat to. The other resource is the Electrosensitive Society. So it's electrosensitiveSociety.com. Basically, Magna Havas's right-hand woman, Sheena, is running that society, and they are trying to track where these safe zones are, or just people's homes that we know that are really low EMF, just so people can go there to recover. It's also a great resource for anyone who's electrically hypersensitive. They have weekly telephone calls or Zoom meetings talking about certain things that people who are electrically hypersensitive would be concerned about, and just helping people move through them. They have meters which people can, I'm not sure if they rent or if they give them away for free or how it works, but they have meters available for people to use. They actually will go into hospitals and talk to doctors as well. So they're an unbelievable resource that hardly anybody knows about. But that's another place where I would start.
Second question, if I may, is a tri-meter, they were made quite a few years ago. Are they still considered adequate?
So yeah, so the old tri-field meters with the analog needle.
Yeah.
So the tri-field meters, those ones are really good for magnetic fields. They're not very sensitive for electric fields, and they are really not sensitive for RF. But they're really good for the magnetic fields. So they will tell you if a situation is getting better or worse for the magnetic fields. The electric fields, they're not that great. And the RF, they'll tell you if something's there, but only if it's very strong. So the Trifield 2, the TF2 is another good meter. It does the magnetic fields, electric fields, and RF a lot better. It does all three of them. So the Trifield TF2 is a huge improvement over the old one if you want kind of one that does all three. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Adrian, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Yes.
So recognizing that 5G has the low, mid, and high bands, one thing that's confusing me is when you start looking at all the maps and people are saying, is there 5G here? Is there 5G here? And you look at these 5G spots, are in the context of the maps, are they talking only about the high band of 5G?
No, they're not.
Okay.
It's kind of a mix. So I know in the States they have the high and the low, and the mid I think just got approved from the FCC. So it's a mixed bag, unfortunately. And I know it's just going to make a confusing situation more confusing, but that's the answer. So if you look at 5G maps, they should only show Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Quebec. But those same maps show everything from the US, which is a mixed bag.
Okay.
So
is that also that lockcell.com, the one that you showed? So there, for the Canada ones in Toronto and all of those, if I look those up, would those be the high band then? You know,
so,
you know, I don't know.
Yeah, so there is no high band in Canada as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
It's just been basically Rogers is the first one out of the gates, and they are at the low band. They're basically, it's like a 4G plus version of 5G. So it's the same frequencies as 4G. It's just a slightly different algorithm, and they might get a slight speed improvement over 4G, but it's nothing to write home about. So yeah, it's the low band.
And so they're claiming that as 5G, but ultimately, so what about here in Alberta, all our cell towers, we're getting way more antennas put on them, right? So our cumulative RF is going up, but it's hard to kind of quantify it, right? Is it 4G, is it 5G? And honestly, I personally don't care, but I also hear a lot of people saying, oh, this is 5G. And I kind of want to say, well, no, this is misinformation. But it's not clear to me. I just know what frequency it is. So is there any other tools that I can look up in addition to the frequency of an antenna to?
Yeah, unfortunately, so, you know, all the free ones, whether it be the Steve Nickel, the OpenCell, the SCADA score, those are all websites where you can look up, you know, cell phone and towers near you. What they'll tell you is different things. Some will tell you whether it's the frequency, which doesn't tell you if it's a 2G or 3G or 5G, right? Just tells you the frequency. And most of them don't spell it out to you. Lockcell is the one that the telecoms actually use. And for $16, you get 24 hours access to it, which is pretty reasonable, but you get access to what a telecom company would look at. And one of the selections is they don't have 5G right now. They just have Rogers 5G, and you can hit that selection and it'll show you where all the Rogers 5G locations are. And it's more accurate than the free ones that you go to, because Lockcell uses their information and they pull information from the telecoms themselves to provide these maps. So it's the best information. It costs you $15 for 24-hour access. But if you're really curious, that's the best information in Canada.
Okay. Have you by chance been able to find the date of installation on Lockcell or elsewhere?
What you get is, it's a little confusing. And what you get is the last date in which that record was modified. So what that means is if they made a change to the tower, you'll know that. But what you can actually access in Loxcell is they have actually these historical data points. So I think they go back right now to August 2018 is the last set of records that you can show. So you can see how the antennas have increased over time. And they do like a snapshot like once or twice a year type of thing. But that's one of the features that's just included with that program. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? I'm just going to scroll through the Zoom chat here. Will you be sending us a recording? Yes. Are the petitions hard copy or online? Courtney, they're online. Petitions for the schools. Where can we find how to hardwire your phones or iPads? You can go to EMF Aware under the blog, and there's a best practices document that you can download from EMF Aware for that. So that was from Nicole. Can you please report the information about Bell? Okay, I think I did that. Long-term care center. Yes, yeah, the EMR systems for healthcare reporting are mostly off of wireless systems. Unfortunately, that's just the way they are for security and for HIP compliance and all that stuff. They don't allow offline use. So that was for Lori. Yeah, kids, Wi-Fi and daycares, that's, do these shieldings also protect against smart meters? Yes, they do. All of them are effective against smart meters are 900 megahertz typically, or at 2.4 gigahertz, and all the shielding materials that I discussed in this presentation slide will work against smart meters. Will you be sending us a recording? Yes. Tri-field we talked about. Yeah, so Margaret, yeah, there's somebody from the city of Calgary. I forget who it is. The name's escaping me, but someone mentioned it in the chat. Probably is. What else do we have here? Cool. Yeah, so if that is all the questions, I know we went a little longer, but this is a very interesting topic for people. So thank you for joining. Was there any other questions?
Yeah, could I just ask one question?
Yeah, for sure.
It's Terry. Just regards to that shielding and the, I forget what it's called, but the tent that you put over your bed.
Yes.
Is that pretty straightforward, or do you have information or directions on doing that on your website, or do you just basically buy it, set it up? Like,
yeah, that's the nice thing about the bed canopy versus painting and using the foil is you can put it up in an afternoon and be done with it. Okay. So the bed canopy is from Safe Living Technologies. They come pre-configured for that. They have a depending on the style of roof that you have in your bedroom, but the standard one is kind of like a tent. So there's three, kind of goes up like this, and there's three dowels, one at the top, two on the sides, and then it drapes down, and the wooden dials you affix to the ceiling. And then they also have one, I think it's called a travel canopy, which is just a hoop, kind of like the mosquito net that you'd have in warm areas. And then it kind of drapes down like that. And sometimes that's an easier installation for people, depending on what their roof is, or if you're renting a space, you might want to do the hoop because it just has one attachment to the top versus a few more holes if you have the bed canopy. But yeah, it's a Swiss Shield Naturel is the product that we typically use. If you do install it, you have to de-energize the room. That's what works for the greatest population. So that is, those are just some general recommendations.
and sorry, when you say de-energize, does that just mean turn off the breaker?
Yeah, so when we do this for people's in a home assessment, is we turn off the breakers to get the body voltage less than 100 millivolts, or get the electric field below 0.1 of a volt per meter. So it's the turning off the breakers to the lights and the outlets in the room will probably get you 60 to 80% of the way there. But there's usually a few other breakers that we'd like to turn off to get it as low as reasonably possible. And those could be the electrical wires running underneath your bed or in the walls to other units. But that's the general idea of it.
And then you just basically set up like hang it to your ceiling, drape it on the floor, and then you're done?
Yes, if you're on a second floor of a home, or basically if you're above ground level, most likely you want to put a floor sheet underneath it, and that will block anything bouncing up from underneath you as well. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward to put up. It's our go-to for condos, just because you can't really get away from the wireless technology. And it does a really good job. So yeah, and those are available from Safe Living Technologies. The
Okay.
discount code that I have on the slides will work for the canopies as well for 5% off. So yeah.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Terry.
Hi, Mitch. It's Linda. One quick question.
Yeah.
On the canopy, do you have to ground it or not?
Yeah, so we have pretty good experience with not grounding it, but if you don't ground it, you have to turn off the power to that room and make sure your electric fields or body voltage are as low as physically possible. If you don't do that, then some people don't sleep very well in some cases. So.
Mm-hmm. So if I turn off the power to the room, I don't have to stick the wire out the window to ground.
Right. Yeah, so if you're using like a Swiss Shield Natural, the silver thread is wrapped in cotton, so you don't really get a good, if you do ground it, it just grounds like one or two threads in the canopy, and it's not grounding the whole thing. It'll do something, but it's not ideal. We get better results by just not grounding it and de-energizing the room completely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Mitch. This is Nicole here.
Yes.
I want more information about the newer vehicles that have the internet capabilities inside the vehicle, that you can like buy packages for your vehicle. How do you like turn that off or remove? I heard you something like an actual chip or something you have to remove from the vehicle for the newer vehicles.
Yeah. Is this a specific vehicle that you have, or are you looking to purchase?
That we have.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 2018. So.
Yeah, and what's the brand?
It's a Yukon.
Yukon.
The
Okay.
GXC.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot, to be honest, dealing with this. Ideally, when you go into your settings, you want to disable your Bluetooth. You want to disable Wi-Fi if your car has Wi-Fi, and then there's also a cellular signal with a lot of these vehicles as well, and we want to disable those. So some brands allow you to do that. Some brands don't. Some brands you have to take into the dealership to get it disabled. Other ones you can't do it anyway, so you have to actually figure out where the module is and disconnect the module inside your car. We recommend this for smart TVs. If it's over 2 years old and you don't have any warranty on your TV, is you can take 10 screws off the back of your TV and just disconnect the Wi-Fi module. It sounds like brain surgery on your TV, but it's really quite simple. And when it comes to your car, it's kind of a similar thing. And there's just so many different makes and models of cars. It's hard to give you an idea of where to look for that module. So you kind of have to have an EMF meter to search and find where this module is in your car and try to disconnect it, or simply have your meter and start unplugging the fuses until the signal goes away. And then you know what circuit it is, then you have to trace back with the wires back to try to find the module inside your car. But I wish there was a simpler way to do that, but there isn't. But that's
if we don't have like a package on our vehicle that's giving us the actual ability to use internet in our vehicle, it's still sending a signal to our vehicle though, right? It's just that we haven't enabled it because we haven't paid for it. Is that correct?
That's very possible. Yeah. When it comes to the cellular signal, that's mostly what it is. It's basically there's basically a cell phone in your car, equivalent of some module that has a SIM card in it, that the car manufacturer has installed. And if you aren't buying their package, well, then you don't have service, but it's still probably trying to transmit.
Yeah.
So that's very possible. A lot of the cars that we go into, we try to disable the Bluetooth. That one's usually pretty simple. Wi-Fi is usually an option, but the cellular component can be quite difficult sometimes.
When you're saying disabling Bluetooth, like that's within the settings in your vehicle itself, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what about the vehicles that have the charging plates for your cell phones?
For the wireless charging.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
that nasty? Because I mean, it's right by your arm usually.
Yeah, what it's going to do is create an elevated magnetic field. That's basically what it does, is uses a magnetic field to induce a current in a coil in your phone to charge it. So it's yeah, it's just not ideal. I haven't measured those ones personally, but yeah, I the closer things are to you, especially in a car, nothing's really all that far away from you. It's probably not ideal.
Yeah. Are you aware if that's something that can be disabled as well?
There'll definitely be a fuse. I don't know what else will be on that circuit in the car, but yeah, it's probably something electrical that has to be severed, or a fuse that has to be pulled out.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Excellent. All right. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up here. So thanks everyone for joining, and we're going to wrap this one up, and I will probably get the recordings out and the slides out to you sometime tomorrow.
Thank you so much. I just appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem, Liz. My pleasure. It's always this is always fun for me trying to explain these technical things out.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, no problem, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. So everybody, I'm going to sign off here and hit the stop recording. So hope everyone